Hello, and thank you for coming to my presentation. My name is Lauren Wong, and I'm a third-year PhD student in special education at the University of Florida. This poster will present a systematic review and meta-analysis of disproportionality in response to intervention, or RTI. The purpose of this study was to examine the effect of the implementation of RTI on the disproportionate representation of minority or disadvantaged students in special education, including the specific learning disability category. The rationale for this study stems from the reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 2004. Prior to this reauthorization, students with disabilities were identified using a discrepancy between achievement and ability. However, differences in how discrepancy was defined, which achievement and ability assessments were used, and bias in teacher referrals and assessments led to a disproportionate staffing of minority or disadvantaged students in special education. Disproportionality in this context refers to when there is an over or under identification of students in special education or a particular disability category, given the broader population of students. The reauthorization of IDEA sought to reduce disproportionality by allowing the use of scientific research-based interventions. Often referred to as response intervention, RTI has been shown to be an effective prevention model that would more accurately distinguish between children who truly have a disability from those whose difficulties could be resolved with interventions. Within RTI, many factors associated with disproportionality were addressed. For example, interventions can be provided by a variety of school personnel, which can potentially reduce bias in teacher referrals for evaluation. So the purpose of this systematic review and meta-analysis was to examine what effects the implementation of RTI has had on disproportionality. My research questions were, how has the implementation of RTI affected the disproportionate staffing of minority and/or disadvantaged groups in special education, the SLD category, RTI, and referral for special education evaluation? And does this effect vary by target group, age or grade, area examined, or whether confounders were controlled for? Articles were identified through a systematic database search and a hand search of the reference sections of included and excluded articles. Articles were included if disproportionality was addressed for at least one minority or disadvantaged group in at least one of the following areas: special education, specific learning disability, and/or RTI. Included articles also had to provide information to calculate a risk index or a risk ratio, be published in English, and use post data after December 2004, which is the date of reauthorization of IDEA. I began with a database search, and searches were not limited by publication type or year. After duplicates were removed, I applied my inclusion criteria to the abstracts, and at this stage, the reference section of all records, whether included or excluded, were hand searched to examine whether any additional articles would meet inclusion criteria. Effect sizes were calculated as the standardized mean difference between pre and post measures with a correction for sample size. An effect size was calculated for each independent sample using extracted frequency counts from each study, and when possible, adjusted effect sizes were calculated to control for pretest measures. In the meta-analysis, robust variance estimation was used to estimate a random effects model where effect sizes were treated as dependent. I also assessed publication bias with a funnel plot and heterogeneity using I-squared, where I-squared greater than 75% was considered to indicate significant heterogeneity. 8 studies met inclusion criteria, and results indicate Black students were the most frequently examined target group, followed by males and English language learners. SLD was the most frequently assessed area for disproportionality, followed by special education, RTI, and evaluation. As you can see in Table 1, across studies, average risk ratios indicate decreases in disproportionality for Black students, males, and ELLs in RTI, minorities in special education evaluations, and males and minorities in special education. However, increases in disproportionality were seen for Black students and males in special education and for Black students in SLD. Results from the meta-analysis indicate an overall non-significant negative effect size across all target groups and areas, where an average decrease in disproportionality was observed, but this decrease is neither significant nor meaningful. Despite a high I-squared, moderator analyses for many areas of interest could not be interpreted due to low degrees of freedom. The moderator analysis for controlling for confounders found no significant effect on disproportionality. However, this should be interpreted with caution, as only one of the 8 included studies controlled for potential confounders. Results from the funnel plot in Figure 1 indicate there is some publication bias due to the asymmetry in the figure. And in conclusion, as shown by the low number of included studies, disproportionality in RTI is a rarely studied area, especially in comparison with the number of studies examining disproportionality in discipline or restraint and seclusion. Across studies, elementary grades and SLD were most frequently examined, which makes sense given the intent and use of RTI as a way to provide early intervention and due to the increased use of RTI data and SLD evaluations. Overall, findings indicate that the implementation of RTI has had neither significant nor meaningful effects of disproportionality, despite average reductions in risk ratios. However, additional research is needed in this area as potential confounders and fidelity of RTI implementation are not typically controlled for. Additionally, it might be more meaningful to examine disproportionality at the state or district levels to determine what effects local implementation of RTI have had on disproportionality and whether these effects might be considered of practical or meaningful significance to district or state administrators. My references are included as a QR code at the bottom right, and thank you so much for coming.